to start with, and then now I'm going to, so we have a bit of an overview about what we'll be doing today. We are doing welcoming introductions, so obviously I've already done that. And then Leila will go over the objectives for this webinar with us, and I will talk a little bit about our Women Human Rights Defenders Initiative, which is our program on women human rights defenders, and about what we'll be doing there. Then Carla and Angie will talk about the Women, War, and Peace series, and Charo will join us for a question and answer session around the situation of women human rights defenders in Colombia. And then we'll talk about how you too can access a screening kit for this very special series and be able to show it in your community and use it as a tool for education and mobilization. So Leila, do you want to go over the objectives now? I'll pass it on to you.
Yes, thank you, Natalia. So as you see, we have outlined 4 objectives for this webinar in which we would like to inform our participants about our AWID's work in protecting and supporting women human rights defenders. We would also like to introduce the Women, War, and Peace series to AWID members who come to us from different parts of the world, and discuss how the film series, together with the dialogue, has the ability to inspire and also to foster ongoing community action. Another objective we have is to draw connections between the film War We Are Living, which you have all hopefully seen, and the work of our members, in particular issues impacting women human rights defenders. And lastly, we aim to provide information on how AWID members can apply for kits to host film screenings in their own locations. So now I'll give back the mic to Natalia.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, is that better? If you can hear me, yes, thank you. Okay, great. So I was just saying, I'm going to talk a little bit about our work with Women Human Rights Defender and our program priorities. So we've only been working with women human rights defenders formally in a program since 2010. So it's been about 3 years since we began this program. And the reason why we started this program was because we saw a really large increase in violence against women human rights defenders, especially gender-based violence. And not only an alarming increase, but a terrible, the acts that were being carried out against women human rights defenders to send them the message to stop their work were extremely terrible. And so we decided that this situation needed a response from the women's movement, and we wanted to see what kind of efforts we could mobilize internationally to respond to that situation. We began by identifying opportunities for collaborating with other organizations that work to protect and support women human rights defenders, and one of those organizations was the International Coalition for Women Human Rights Defenders, which brings together a set of allied organizations and partners to work at the international level on these issues. We were interested in bringing a feminist perspective to the discussion, and also to ensure that financial resources are available and are effective in responding to the needs, the specific needs of women human rights defenders, especially when they're facing situations of risk and violence. We really wanted to help our partners, allies, and members navigate the human rights mechanisms for support in case of situations of risk and emergency. But we also wanted to confront the situation and begin the work of decreasing the risks that women human rights defenders face by improving the responses that were offered to them by international institutions like the UN and other international NGOs. And we also work really hard to strengthen local and sub-regional networks across movements, across sectors, identities. We wanted to increase visibility and solidarity responses with women human rights defenders. And so we began by deepening our relationships with women human rights defenders networks and developing resources and materials and disseminating action alerts in response to these situations. But all of these coming from a feminist perspective. And then we set out to follow 4 objectives for AWID's work. First was to promote collaboration between women human rights organizations and, in general, human rights organizations at the international level that were talking about the violence that defenders in general were speaking, but we're not speaking specifically to the issues that women human rights defenders face because they were women. We also began by speaking to trying to strengthen and document sub-regional models like those found in Mesoamerica, for example, where we've done a lot of work with those networks to support their work on women human rights defenders and to increase the security, self-care, and solidarity among them and among other organizations. And then we wanted to start building some knowledge and disseminating information about the situation of violence against women human rights defenders, and also about existing tools and mechanisms that were available to respond to the violence, and to raise awareness and increase understanding about the diverse contexts and that facilitate violence against women. So, and last but not least, we wanted to engage our own constituencies. So you, our members and our allies, in taking rapid action in solidarity and building and disseminating action alerts to our website and our electronic newsletters to raise the profile of women human rights defenders facing violence and aggression, and to contributing to ensuring their safety, to putting pressure on different governmental bodies and institutions. So how do we work with our WHRDs, Women Human Rights Defenders at Risk? Well, we do it in a variety of ways. We already talked about the action alerts, and we also put out statements in their support that we also send through to different governmental bodies. We also write solidarity letters and contact authorities to advocate for women human rights defenders and for their protections. We send information to UN special rapporteurs and UN bodies to also let them know about the situation and have them do some work in terms of pressuring authorities to protect women human rights defenders. We refer WHRDs to other organizations that can provide assistance and sometimes financial resources for temporary relocation, for security and risk assessments. And we promote, again, wellness and self-care and security. How do we take care of ourselves? What things can we do to make our situations much more secure? What do we have control of? And then we also, obviously, we mobilize the AWID membership. Other things that we've done is we work really closely with the Women Human Rights Defenders International Coalition. You can find more information about them on the web. And we'll be providing you with the link to their website and other materials after the webinar as well. AWID has created a list of resources. Since part of our work was to create more publications and more research about and for women human rights defenders. And you can find that information. Leila, I don't know if you want to put the link in the chat box on our website at awid.org. I think Leila will share the link there with you on the chat box. And then we also have a wiki tool, which we use. It's an online directory of urgent responses for women human rights defenders that we launched last year. And that you can find here at this address. I'm going to put it into the chat box so you can have it. And give me 1 second to get this in here. I don't know, Leila, if you can put the wiki link in there. And you know, we have a couple of things that we've done at the global level, including working with the Mesoamerican Initiative of Women Human Rights Defenders and Justice Associates as well. We've worked in our forum in Istanbul to bring together women human rights defenders to collaborate to create a wellness area to address issues of self-care. And last year we carried out webinars on women human rights defenders as well, both in English and Spanish. Let me see. I think this is the end of the conversation around the resources and the work that AWID does. And I wonder if anybody has any questions. We can take questions. You can press the raise hand button to ask your question, and then press the talk button to ask. Please go ahead. Apneet, do you want to go ahead and speak? You can press the talk button. We can't hear you. Do you want to put your question in the chat box since we can't hear you? Okay, Apneet, we cannot hear you, so if you can put your question. We don't work specifically on countries. That's a great question. While we do carry out action alerts on situations of risk in different countries, we don't work specifically on countries. We work at the regional and international level, and we're strengthening our work in Asia, but it's taking a little bit more time to do that, and we're working hard to do that. To work at the country level would be quite difficult for us. We don't have the resources right now to do that. But whenever we do encounter situations that women human rights defenders are facing of risk and that are grave, we do try to bring those to the international level. Elizabeth, do you want to ask your question? You can press the talk button to ask your question.
Can you hear me? Yes, okay, my question, hi everybody. My question is,
yes.
Are we going to address the problem of people not having access to internet because it's unreliable or not affordable? And, I think we often assume that all of these wonderful resources that are available are easily accessible to the people who are on the front line, for example, like the women in the film. And I think this is a critical issue for us to address. And I've downloaded a lot of the resources, and I will send them on. But, addressing this, how do we facilitate greater connectivity for people? Because that immediate communication is so important in the work of human rights defenders.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think Charo can speak more to the issues of connectivity in the rural areas in Colombia, but I do understand your point, and I think that's why we try really hard to work with regional networks who are more closely related to the women human rights defenders that usually represent different countries and different localities, and they're very connected to what's happening at the grassroots and able to get word out when these situations happen. But we do understand the issues of connectivity, and I think there are other organizations that are working on those issues as well with women human rights defenders. And we love to get any resources that you have available to share with the rest of the group. Was there another question? Thank you, Elizabeth. Trying to see. Dulma, would you like to ask your question? Press the talk button or insert it into, do we have an office in the UK? No, we do not have an office in the UK. AWID is a decentralized organization, So what we have is we have offices in Toronto, Canada, in South Africa, and in Mexico City. But most of our staff work from different locales around the world. I think we have staff right now in 32 countries because people tend to work from home, and we support that. It gives us a sense of what the movement's doing around the world as well. But we don't have an office in the UK. Is there somebody else who's asking a question? Oh, Caro, did you want to say something?
Can you hear me?
Or no? I don't know.
Hello? Oh, okay. No, just regarding
Yes.
the connectivity and the difficulties for people that live in rural areas and isolated areas. We do have that issue in Colombia. Afro-descendant women mostly live in very isolated areas and don't have access and also don't really know how to use internet, computers, etc. So what we do, and I think what can be done, is basically through the different through trainings and the networking that we built up locally and regionally. I think it's more up to the organizations and the people that is in the cities or in the areas where it's easy to connect, to make that link with organizations and women that have no that access, and ensure that they know that the resources exist and that those who have access to the internet and the resources can facilitate for them the connections and information.
Great. Thank you, Charo, for that. Kumud, did you have a question and would you like to press the talk button and ask it, or you can insert it into the chat box? Kumud, we can't hear you. No, it hasn't been difficult. The issue has been capacity as well for us. We don't have to work in Asia. Kumud is asking if it's been difficult to work in Asia. I'm sorry if I mischaracterized the situation. I think for us the challenge has been also an issue of capacity. We are working at the regional level and trying to build on learned experiences, and so we're using the experiences of our work with the International Women Human Rights Defenders Coalition that is very well connected, and then working with different regional bodies and building on those experiences to spread our work more globally. But it also becomes an issue of capacity as well. Right now we're working our work began very closely in Mesoamerica, and we are learning a lot from that experience and thinking about how we can replicate those experiences in those areas like Asia and Africa as well. And if there's, Elizabeth, did you want to say something else? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Yeah, Elizabeth? We can't hear you, so do you want to type it in? Okay. Duma, would you like to, does anybody, Duma, would you like to ask a question? If not, we're going to move on.
Hello, can you hear me? I would like to ask...
Go ahead. It's a little bit low.
Hello. I would like to ask what kind of professionals you need in your work. Yeah, what sort of professionals, like what qualifications? Yeah.
Well, we're not hiring right now for our Women Human Rights Defenders program, and I think every position has its own requirements. And when we do hire, we do have newsletters that we put out with job announcements. You can sign up for those on awid.org, and I think Leila can share the link there on the chat box. But right now we don't have any openings.
I want to know in general, like often, like some qualification needed more than another. Like, for example, do you need many lawyers in your?
Yeah, I think in this. You know, I don't work on the human resources end of things, and in this webinar we're really focusing on the work that we do with women human rights defenders, not on job positions. So I wouldn't be able to speak to that. Those are the skills that of the people that we hire are decided somewhere else in the organization. Leila can share. I think Leila has shared the job resources newsletter there with you, so you can see the kind of requirements that different organizations have for people who work on these issues. And now I'm going to move on to the next part of our webinar because we want to give time to our colleagues to talk about the Women, War, and Peace series discussion. So I'm going to pass it on, I think, right now to Carla and Angie from Peace is Loud, who will speak to these issues. And we'll do our best to answer other questions in the chat box.
Hi, this is Carla. Angie will hopefully be joining us shortly, but I just wanted to make sure that we're all familiar with Women, War, and Peace. Hopefully many of you had a chance to watch one of the films in the series, The War We Are Living, recently online. And for those of you that did watch, you know that the film follows two women human rights defenders in the Cauca region, Colombia. And beyond that film, the Women, War, and Peace series includes 4 other films, and they focus on women in Afghanistan, Bosnia, Liberia, and a final overview hour with interviews with experts and practitioners. Women, War, and Peace was premiered in the U.S. on public television in 2011, where it reached a broad audience, actually about 13 million people, which we were very excited about. And following that broadcast, we've really shifted gears and are working to make sure the films reach an audience outside of the U.S. And this inspired us to create the Women, War, and Peace screening kit. And the screening kit includes all 5 films in the series, including The War We Are Living and, of course, the 4 others, and a brand new discussion and resource guide. And at the end of the webinar, we're going to talk more about the screening kits and how everyone who's participating can receive one. Does anyone at this point have any questions about the film series? If so, you can just press the raise hand button, as we were doing before. Okay, well, it seems like there are no questions at this point, so I think maybe we'll move on.
Hi, Carla. I had to re-log into the system. I was having problems, everyone. Sorry about that.
Well, that's okay. Welcome, Angie. Do you want to add anything to the overview of Women, War, and Peace?
Let's see. I was actually just going to, why don't I first, I just also want to thank AWID and Natalia and Leila in particular for giving us this opportunity to introduce Women, War, and Peace to all of you, and for the opportunity to talk about Peace is Loud's Global Screening Series initiative, which I know Carla just introduced. I don't want to repeat, Carla, so I was going to just give a little background about Women, War, and Peace. Did you already do that?
Sure. I had mentioned the U.S. television broadcast and then the creation of the international screening kits that...
Okay, well first, just so everybody knows who we are, Carla and I are part of a nonprofit. We're at a nonprofit organization called Peace is Loud. We're based here in the United States, actually New York City to be exact. And we're a new organization that works to amplify the voices of women in peace building using the power of media. And there'll be more to come about our work in the coming months, but our focus right now has been to launch the Global Screening Series Initiative for Women, War, and Peace. As Carla mentioned, we've partnered with Fork Films and 13, which were the co-producers and the co-creators of Women, War, and Peace, Abigail Disney, Ginny Redeker, and Pamela Hogan, to bring the series to a global audience in the aim to further women's equality and peace building. So I know that everyone participating in today's program had a chance to preview one of the 5 films in the series, The War We Are Living. But I just wanted to also give you some background about the other 4 films in the series, because you probably haven't had a chance to learn about the other films. So Women, War, and Peace is a 5-part documentary film series exploring women's strategic role in conflict and peace building. It focuses on conflicts in Bosnia, Liberia, Afghanistan, and Colombia to report the stories of women in hotspots all over the world. The series demonstrates that women have moved to the center of contemporary war zones, finding themselves increasingly targeted as civilians, as well as risking their lives to call for peace and justice. One of the episodes, called I Came to Testify, is the story of how 16 women who were imprisoned and raped by Serb-led forces in the Bosnian town of Foča broke history's great silence and stepped forward to take the witness stand into an international court of law. The result was a triumphant verdict that led to new international laws about sexual violence in war. Pray the Devil Back to Hell, which some of you may already be familiar with. It was actually released a few years back, and then it was part of the Women, War, and Peace series, is the previously unreported story of the Liberian women who took on the warlords and regime of dictator Charles Taylor in the midst of civil war and won a once unimaginable peace for their country in 2003. Peace Unveiled is the film covering the conflict in Afghanistan, and it follows 3 women in Afghanistan who are risking their lives to make sure that women have a seat at the negotiating table, and of course that continues to be played out to this day. And similarly, in The War We Are Living, the film that you've previewed, it reveals the struggle in Cacao, Colombia, where 2 extraordinary Afro-Colombian women, Clemencia Carabelli and Francia Marquez, are fighting and continue to fight to hold on to the gold-rich lands that have sustained their community through small-scale mining for centuries. Carabelli and Marquez are standing up for a generation of Colombians who've been terrorized and forcibly displaced as a deliberate strategy of war. And the final film, the 5th film in the series, is called War Redefined, and it's basically a film that has leading thinkers and politicians and how they're expanding their own lens and how they look at war to include women's strategic role in global conflict, peacemaking, and post-war reconciliation. As Carla said, we had Women, War, and Peace premiered on public television here in the U.S., and so we're now working with partner organizations like AWID, and hopefully many of you participating in today's program to bring the films to a wider audience globally. So Carla will talk a little bit more about the screening initiative in a bit, but I wanted to see if folks had any questions about the series we can take a couple of those now before we move on. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So if anyone has any questions about Women, War, and Peace, they can either use the chat box or use the talk button. Otherwise, oh, here we go. Kamud, to answer your question, if you would be able to watch the rest in the series, actually, yes. One of the aspects of today's program is to actually share with all of you how you can access all 5 films in Women, War, and Peace. And as Carl probably already mentioned, they are now, in addition to being in English, they're dubbed into Spanish, French, and Arabic.
I think Elizabeth had a question.
Any other questions?
Elizabeth, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Elizabeth?
Can you hear me now? Hello? Hello? Yeah, this is Elizabeth. Can you? Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah,
Hi,
my
Elizabeth.
question that I typed in earlier was, you know, it's, well, the work that I'm doing, for example, I would like to be able to share these films with more than one location. And the locations that I work with across the Pacific Islands, or even across one country like Papua New Guinea, are far away from each other. It's not, you know, sharing's not practical. People would need their own set. So beyond us and the work that we do to empower and protect women human rights defenders, how can we disseminate this film material to the field level, to the where you know there's a group of human rights defenders wanting to be able to work together and to use films like this to inform, connect themselves. So more than one location, more than one set, is that feasible?
Hi, Elizabeth. It's a great question, and we certainly would love to work with you and your organization to make sure that you receive, you know, the number of screening kits that you would need in multiple locations. So Carla's going to, in a bit, just sort of go through the sort of process, and it's fairly straightforward, but we'll explain the process for how to receive screening kits. But certainly, you know, we want to make sure, the idea here is that the films can be sort of cared for and used by organizations, by groups that recognize its value, you know, to, you know, as you said, do training and education, and really to spark, you know, organizing, you know, whether it be political organizing, you know, or constituency building. So, you know, our goal is to make sure that these kits get into, you know, the hands of organizations that are fully going to be able to utilize them. And so we're really, you know, eager to partner with folks like yourself and who want to use the media content. Are there any other questions? There doesn't appear to be. Oh, here we go. Sorry, Amy, go ahead.
Hello. I'm wondering why were these specific areas chosen? If you can speak on that for a bit.
Sure, that's a great question. So The filmmakers, when they had set out to identify which conflicts they were going to cover, I mean, of course, that in itself was a huge task. And you know, the thinking here is that they wanted to look at sort of from a variety of different sort of questions, lens, which is one, they wanted to cover sort of a current conflict, and then they also wanted to look at, you know, a conflict that had a historical perspective. They also were looking at, so in the case of the war we are living, for example, a conflict that's gone largely unrecognized, you know, was important, as well as sort of conflicts I think that are more, you know, seen as, you know, sort of through media and through coverage, you know, as conflicts that are currently happening. They're, you know, in the case of Pray the Devil Back to Hell, just some background there, that was actually a film that basically the filmmaker Abigail Disney had sort of, you could say, stumbled upon when she was traveling to Liberia early on, really there for something completely unrelated. She had heard about this sort of, you know, organizing that the women in Liberia had done, and yet she had known nothing about it. And this was several years after, you know, the Civil War had ended. And when she came back to the United States after hearing about, you know, what the women had accomplished, and yet there was no real, you know, media coverage about it, she had actually set out at that point to try to, you know, tell the story in essence. So that was actually how Pray the Devil came about, which was then the genesis for Women, War, and Peace. And just to add that in the case of Liberia, the filmmakers had quite a sort of a challenge in terms of finding footage that they could use, archival footage that you know, wasn't just solely focused on, you know, the male soldiers or the children, but really, you know, why was there no footage covering women, the women that had organized, you know, all the way leading up to the peace talks and across. And so it became sort of, you know, a mission within a mission to, you know, find these stories, to sort of tell these stories. But certainly, you know, to your point, I mean, many other conflicts, you know, could have been included in such a series. And in fact, I'll add that Fork Films, which is the co-producer of Women, War, and Peace, and was the producer of Pray the Devil Back to Hell, is actually in early production on a new film connected to, you know, the same kind of issues, themes presented in this series about women mobilizing in the Arab Spring. So does that answer your question? Amy, are you there? So are there any other questions about? I think some of we can't hear you. You want to try to cut off and turn off your button because it's very fuzzy. Thanks, Amy. I see your response in the chat box. So yes, we look forward to getting the films to you as well. So Kumud, I see that you have a question. Do you want to go ahead, either to talk into the microphone or to ask your question in the chat box. Oh, here it is. So, Kamud, I see your question, which is, in the war we are living, did these women face any resistance from their own communities? And does the type of issue they are involved in or protesting against affect this? You know, I can't speak directly to that question. That's a really great question, but from what I've ascertained, it seems like you know, the work that the two women in particular that are featured in the film, you know, that a lot of their work that they did within the Afro-Colombian community, that it was, of course, a process, but that they were really working to mobilize within the communities. And you know, so I can't speak directly, but you know, Charo, I imagine, who's going to speak shortly, might be able to answer that question. So maybe we can save that for when Charo is up.
We only have a couple of minutes in this section. Maybe if we take one last question and round it off, and maybe have Charo speak, because I feel like we're getting into questions that she could answer. I think she's up next.
Great. I think Magda has had her hand up. Magda, do you want to ask your question? So Magda's question about do we have plans on covering stories about women human rights defenders living under other dictatorships? Right now, Fork Films, as I mentioned, is underway on a new film project, you know, about women in the Arab Spring. So right now, that's the focus of their next film. So we don't have, you know, or Fork Films doesn't have other projects underway at this point. Okay, I think we're going to move on. Right, Natalia?
Okay, thank you, Angie. So right now we're going to have Charo Minas Rojas. For some reason I can't move the slide, so Leila, do you want to move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. And Charo is, no, the one before that. Thank you. Charo is a human rights activist, as I said before, with the she's the National Coordinator of Advocacy and Outreach for the International Working Group of Black Communities Process, or Proceso de Comunidades Negras, and she's a member of the Afro-Colombian Solidarity Network. She is a tireless advocate. I am witness to that. I have been friends with Charo for a long time and have seen her work on these issues for a very long time. They're very dear and near to her heart. And she is a leading voice for the cultural and territorial rights of self-determination of the African descendant communities in Colombia. And I have to say that everybody's in for quite a treat, because Charo knows so much about the situation and understands so much about the situation. So if you have any questions about the movie and the speakers and the leaders in that movie, I think this is your time to ask. Charo, so I'll give you the floor to you so you can start.
Okay, thank you so much. Can you hear me well? Hello?
We can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. All right, great. Well, thank you, Natalia, for that introduction, and thank you so much, AWID and Pieces Loud, for opening up this space that for us, Afro-descendant women in Colombia, is so important. Basically, because the situation of Afro-descendant women is so invisible, not just outside of Colombia, but in Colombia. People in Colombia have no knowledge, no idea, they don't have much interest really on understanding and knowing what is happening with Afro-descendant communities. Well, as you saw in the video, in the world we are living, the situation of Afro-descendant women, it is complicated. It's great deal of unsafety and death threats for Afro-descendant and human rights defenders women. But it's the situation that you see in the North del Cauca is the situation that women in Colombia, Afro-descendant women and human rights defenders are living in Colombia, and all the corners of Colombia is the same situation for indigenous also. But as I said before, it's greater for Afro-descendants and ethnic groups because it's so invisible, it's so silent. To update a little bit in terms of the also to respond one of the questions I saw about this particular case in North del Cauca. The situation haven't changed much, despite the fact that there are constitutional court orders to the government to stop these mining concessions. The mining concessions continued, the illegal mining in the territories continued, and it makes it worse the presence of projects, large-scale economic projects from the government. Excuse me, from the government. Now the communities have to face the mining code. The government is going to change the mining code, the ruling for mining, which is going to affect greatly these communities, because the mining code what says is basically that the communities are illegal workers, and that the mining that the communities do is illegal, and they will demand a lot of paperwork for them to get permissions to work on their lands, for they to continue doing their artisanal mining. So on top of the situation with these illegal concessions, we have now situation with the government itself generating greater problems and greater danger for the communities and for these leaders that have to confront now not only foreigners, not only armed groups, but also the state itself. So that is the situation for Clemencia in Francia. These leaders and the organizations in their communities have received in the last 3 years 17 death threats from mostly paramilitary groups. On top of that, they are in the middle of armed confrontations between army and guerrilla groups. Now leaders are targeted by the government. There is persecution on the government. The leaders are pointed as guerrilla members. Some have been jailed. So it's a lot to face for these women. But the situation of Norte del Cauca spread to areas like Buenaventura and Tumaco, other regions of Afro-descendant population and communities, where violence takes greater proportions, and it is not only excuse me, it's not only well, the political violence, sexual violence, which is significant in places like Tumaco and Buenaventura, which are in the Pacific Coast region of Colombia, and other sorts of violence that are affecting the economic and cultural rights of women. For instance, in the case of La Toma, the right to work, the right to land, the free expression are rights that are affected by all these actions and generate violence against the woman. And we argue that there is a factor that generates this great factor for violence against women, which is the racism that we face in Colombia. For instance, situations in Tumaco and Buenaventura against human rights defenders. The impact of war have increased the sexual violence against human rights defenders and against girls. Women is forced to prostitution by armed groups. Women is forced to collaborate with one group or another as informants. Women are confined in their own neighborhoods and in their own communities. They cannot organize. They are prohibited to organize. They are prohibited to dress well. They cannot. If an armed member decide to choose a woman as their partners, they are basically condemned to death if they are seen by any other man or they are pursued by any romantically by any other man. So women is in these areas completely tied up by these armed groups. I think I'm going to leave space for questions. I think since you saw the video and are getting some information, great information through the videos, you may have a lot of questions, and I prefer to just go through the questions and see how we can really have a discussion. Thank you.
Go ahead, Apneet. Why don't you ask your question? Apneet, we can't hear you. Do you want to type your question into the chat box?
Can I use it? Hello?
Go ahead.
Okay, I see a couple questions here, and I actually going to take the one back that was asked before. In terms of the community resistance, if the women have take resistance from the community, and if these type of issues affect how they affect. If you are referring to the video itself, the production itself, there was no resistance from the communities. In fact, the community of North El Cauca of La Toma, where Francia and Clemencia are, were very supportive of the production of this video. However, we haven't been able to show it in Colombia due to the great risk that represents for the two leaders, especially because their family, the children of Clemencia, are exposed, and she felt like they could represent greater danger. Unfortunately, we are not, as organization, and as communities, we are not really in a position to expose the women without offering safety for them, more protection for them. We cannot count on the police and the authorities, and that responds to another of the questions. We cannot count on the authorities. There is no confidence on the authorities. There is no accountability on the authorities. The authorities, the police, the army have been proved to be linked to these paramilitary groups that threat women and leaders. So unfortunately, despite the many laws and the many legal protections that we actually have in the practice in the ground, it is difficult to ensure the protection through the authorities and the legal resources. We do have some self-protection actions that is what keep us alive and moving, but definitely no support from the authorities as should be. In terms of solidarity, yeah, obviously there is a great need for solidarity. Why these spaces, these events like the one we are just now, is so important, because more and more, sorry, there's a big storm is happening here, so you will hear a lot of thunder and noise probably. But more and more awareness. We really need to get this out from the shadows. We really need to make this situation visible, because that's what protects us mostly. In some ways, we don't want to expose directly a leader in Colombia itself, but internationally we want to expose the situation and make people aware and mobilize a lot of solidarity and the rejection of this international community to these abuses against women and against human rights defenders, so we can make the government actually accountable. And so events like this are really important for us.
A couple of questions in the talk. I think Magda, you were first. If you want to go ahead and ask your question. Magda, we can't hear you. Do you want to type your question in the chat box? And maybe Isis, do you want to ask your question? I'm not sure if I'm saying your name correctly. Isis or Isis, do you want to ask your question?
I decided to type.
Okay, Monica, do you have a question that you'd like to ask?
Hi, I'm Monica. Oh, 2 quick questions. First, I want to know if Cavalier and markets are good and safe right now. And the second question is, Charo, how important do you consider the access to internet as a resource to improve as well the work or the goal that the women defenders are trying to reach, and as well as a resource to get more safe, to get safer, to be very secure? Thank you.
Okay. And I see some other questions on writing here. In terms of the internet, the access to internet, how important we see it, for us it's very important. Internet is a way to communicate outside the little boundaries we have, our limits in what is happening. It's a greater way to express the voice about what is happening. It has been very useful for alerts, for instance, for statements, for solidarity statements from other networks. We have a network in the United States, for instance, that constantly is raising awareness and issuing statements rejecting and regretting human rights abuses against women and against adolescent and human rights defenders. Obviously, because most of the organizations and communities are so rural, they don't have access to the internet. So it is our responsibility to inform and translate and transfer that information that comes from outside and what we reproduce outside to them and maintain them informed. But for us as advocates, as activists, internet has become a great resource and an opportunity to raise awareness. In terms of a question I saw right in here about why this woman is so powerful and if racism has something to do with it, definitely. Why this woman is so powerful? Because we spoke from the right that assist us as Afro-descendants, as ethnic group. These women, these communities, as you hear in the video, have been there since 1636. So they built up these communities. They discovered these mining places. We have built our communities and we have contributed to this, the construction of the country. We are empowered by our rights and the identity that assists us as a Black people. And that is what you see in Clemencia, that is what you see in Francia. And because we have been so discriminated, because racism is in effect an issue in Colombia, that definitely empowers us more because we know we have to speak louder. We know we have to be more visible. We know that we have to speak from the right that assists us and that we are not asking for favors. So it's what you see on Clemencia. What you see in Clemencia, what you see in Francia, and what you will see in Afro-descendant women in Colombia who are empowered by the identity and the rights of us as Afro-descendants, and land is a very important resource and source of that power and identity also for us. I need to read what is. I have to read other things that people are writing, but if someone wants to raise their hand, if we still have some time.
I think Shadows, there were people asking what was the impact of the movie on the Cauca region, and did the women human rights defenders suffer any persecution or more violence for appearing in the movie?
Okay. As I said before, we haven't showed the movie in Colombia and locally and internally. The communities have seen it. And the community council, for instance, the organizations, and internally we have seen it, but haven't been shown broadly, precisely because it represents a greater threat for the women. And we cannot, we cannot expose them directly as it is. However, it is very important for us, this video, and it's important because it can be shown outside of Colombia. And I'm actually very happy to see the kit that this is Loud made, because what we can do is use another videos to generate a discussion about what is happening in Colombia using the videos like, for instance, the Liberian video. We can use the other videos that show women in other countries and use those to generate the questions and raise the issues that are happening in Colombia without exposing directly these two women. But it is important that this video has been made. And we are very grateful for that, because it helps to raise awareness outside the Colombia and help us to advocate. It helps us to explain what is happening, and it reaches greater audiences to these sources. So it is important. But I think more important is that this kid now gave us opportunity to talk about the issue using other experiences in other countries, and it's going to be very important for us.
Hi, this is Angie. I just wanted to also just jump in and add that, we've been, Pieces Loud has been working really closely with Charo, actually dating back to when we had the broadcast here in the U.S. And as she said, this particular film has been mostly shown here in the U.S. And actually, I know Charles participated on several panel discussions, both on Capitol Hill here in the U.S. and working with WHRDs, the Washington Office for Latin America, in an effort to influence, U.S. policymakers, to act, in terms of respect for the human rights of, Afro-Colombians and, maintaining their autonomy. And so there's a lot of policy advocacy work I know that's happening here, using this particular film as sort of a jumping off point, and really just to educate. But we have, I mean, that's why these partnerships with folks like, PCN are so important, because we recognize that, that there are security issues. Even at the time of the broadcast here in the U.S., we were in contact with Francia and Clemencia at various points to really make sure that we were always sort of mindful of and careful of even just the kind of press and media. So that's something that we've of course strive to do. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Hi. Yeah, it's Elizabeth here. Can I go ahead? Hello.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. My question was, what didn't come across very clearly in the film, and this is something I missed, is how are they communicating with each other? The two women in Colombia that we saw, obviously they lived a distance away from each other, but all of their network of activists, are they using mobile phone? Is mobile phone affordable? Are they able to charge their mobile phones? This was something of interest, I think. How, because obviously mobile phones, as I mentioned, they're now something that can be used. They can be used also to access internet. But how do people keep them going in areas where there isn't a constant power supply, where service providers are the service is very expensive? And I just wondered, in the Colombian situation, what is the mode of communication that enables people to act quickly, to mobilize, etc.?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Chapter, do you want to speak to that?
Yes. I missed few things that you were asking, but how we reach each other, how women communicate between them. Mostly through gatherings, really, especially for the isolated communities, the women that are in isolated communities. Well, there are different ways. Workshops, regular meetings, different encounters, assemblies that are happening constantly are some of the spaces, the opportunities to communicate. There is a way of communication through mensajes, that people send. They send to people. There's a woman that is leaving the town and go to another town, another village. We carried information to others. Some within the organization, PCN organization, some of us mobilize to the communities, visit regularly some areas, gather information and transfer that information to others. Those are mostly the ways to do it. Internet, as I say, is not very used. Phones are other way, although phones have become very insecure, so we cannot say everything on the phone. We cannot call for critical things. We cannot just call someone. But phones are useful in terms of keep track and inform people where they are, although not necessarily saying where. And so those are the ways. I saw something about education that I would like to address also, and a question about how the U.S. Department of State got informed and involved. In terms of education, the question was if they saw there is one university and if there are gender and Afro-descendant women's issues specifically addressed in education. Not really. There is gender but no link to race, and that is one of the issues we have in terms of the discussions about the Afro-descendant women's situation, because there is a lot of work on gender, there is a lot of work on women, there is a lot of work on violence against women in Colombia. It has been increasingly and gradually increasing, but no Afro-descendant. That link, that intersectionality with race is something that is not properly addressed in many cases, and is not addressed in others. And universities really don't have that focus. In terms of the information and the involvement of the Department of State and the U.S. government, PCN, the Black Communities Process, the organization we are a member of, have developed international solidarity work and advocacy and some networks. And we partnered with organizations like WHRDs and Angie mentioned, with organizations like Global Rights, like South Africa Forum, that have helped us to reach U.S. government, to reach Department of State. The U.S. provides significant resources to Colombia. Around 8.5 billion have been given to Colombia in the last 10 years, 12 years, and mostly for military use. So we use all these as leverage to lobby and to advocate with the U.S. government to make them aware that those resources that come from taxpayers, people in the United States, are going to support human rights violations in Colombia. And so we regularly have some delegations that come from Colombia to the U.S., and we visit Congress offices, particularly the Black Caucus. We visit the Department of State, we talk to the embassy, and we are constantly raising these issues through this network and these organizations that work in solidarity and support of our work.
There were a couple of questions in the chat box, one for Angie about how it's been to carry out advocacy efforts, and I think I saw there's a couple of people that have been waiting for a bit. I think Amy, I saw on the chat box, or wants to speak as well. So I don't know, Angie, if you want to talk about the process of advocacy. And there was a question about, or a comment about, U.S. influence in the conflict in Colombia that Charo, you might want to address.
Sure, Natalia. I'll I answered Amy's question in the chat box, and I'll share my response. The question was about advocacy efforts and how that's going, and basically, our role is in this case to largely supply the film content and to work with NGOs and organizations to incorporate the film content, along with sometimes providing access to sort of speakers that can contribute to, let's say, the dialogue. But largely our work is to work with, for example, like Charo mentioned, like WOLA, PCN, so that the media content can be sort of fully maximized in their education and advocacy building work. One example I mentioned was, we are working with the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, which works with 60+ local groups on an international level, largely in conflict settings, where they work at the local level on implementation of UN Security Resolution 1325. And so working with them in terms of getting the screening kits into the hands of groups that they can actually do education, with particularly women in their communities, and about educating them on what the laws actually permit, and to involve them in ensuring that full implementation of the Women, Peace, and Security resolutions. The second question came from Upmeet about distribution in India. So there's in terms of the screening kits, we're actually Pieces Loud is responsible for distributing the screening kits to partner organizations. So we can certainly, Upmeet, talk with you, about making sure that you have access to the kits. As far as, for example, any kind of sort of television broadcast, on a larger scale, that is something we also would love to see happen more, because obviously that reaches then a larger, more mainstream audience. We have an international distributor that is charged with doing that kind of work, but we find ourselves often in those conversations as well. So if anyone has immediate or direct access to sort of broadcasts that you think this content they might be interested in, we would love to hear hear from you. But right now, and I should also mention that in India, Upmeet, and we can maybe talk about this offline, is in India there will be a new initiative to bring 2 of the films in this series. So Pray the Devil Back to Hell and I Came to Testify, so Liberia and Bosnia, the 2 films, to actually have them brought to India, and that's part of the independent television service ITV's Women and Girls Lead initiative. So I can provide some information to you about that, since one of the countries they'll be bringing these films is in India. Let's see, making sure I got other questions here.
Charo, did you want to say something?
Yes, I just saw a question on the chart about data collection. Is this data collection going to report on cases of abuse, disaggregated, and if there is any need for help on this regard? And definitely there is a need for help. As I mentioned before, one of the main issues we have is the fact that the issues of violence against Afro-descendant women and human rights defenders are completely invisible. And data collection is one of those issues. We don't have enough disaggregated information when a woman is threatened, when a woman is forced to sexual abuse, when a woman is disappeared or is killed. We don't necessarily have the information of it was an Afro-descendant or not. And it is not for the information that we collect locally when organizations and people inform, we wouldn't have some of the numbers we have and we manage. But one great problem is, for instance, for sexual abuse, sexual violence, and disappearances, because those regularly happen following or previous threats to women and families. So people don't talk about it, and women wouldn't inform about this situation. So there is not enough information and data that we can use, and we definitely need it. We just launched a project last year, the Afro-Descendant Women Human Rights Defenders Project, that aimed to resolve this issue. One of the objectives we have is precisely to train women and women organizations in how to collect data, how to maintain some information on what is happening, how to provide that information, and for us to generate a system that can collect that information, that can organize it, that can document the cases. We produced a report that was also launched last year. It's called Defeating Invisibility. I think that if you Google it, and I actually can write it down here. If you Google it, you will find it easily, invisibility. And it's a preliminary report where we not only offer some minimum data information on disappearances, sexual abuses, and threats to women, Afro-descendant women, but also provide like an analysis of the main factors we consider are generators of violence against women, because we don't talk only about sexual abuse or sexual violence or political violence. We think there are many uses, many situations, many factors that generate violence against Afro-descendant women. Some of them have to be from economic roots, and others have to do with racism and discrimination against Afro-descendant women. And that goes for another question that I saw about intersectionality with race. We as organizations, Black Communities Process, we do address the intersectionality of gender and race, and we do address the issue that race has to do. Racism in Colombia is a main factor of violence against Afro-descendant women and against human rights defenders that are of Afro-descendant origin.
Hi, Charo. I think there was a question in the chat box about the intersections of race and gender in the conflict in Colombia. And I think you already answered these questions about access to education and human rights, education for Afro-Colombian women. But I don't know if you wanted to say anything else about that as well.
Yeah, I did talk about the education and mentioned that and unfortunately this intersection of race and the issues of gender is not commonly addressed, and in the cases that it's addressed, it's not properly addressed. Really, race is an issue that is not addressed in Colombia. Racism is an issue that is not really addressed in Colombia. Colombia has this, we call it racial democratic discourse. That means that people, the government and the society believe that there is no racism because we are mixed from races, that is mestizaje, and because there are a series of laws that protect Afro-descendant human rights. However, the actions speak differently, and the discrimination against Black people in Colombia is great. Violence particularly has to do with this race issue. As I said before, racism for us is one of the main factors, generators of violence, different forms of violence against Afro-descendant women and against Afro-descendant people in general. For omission, because it's ignored, the issue is ignored because of the invisibility of the issues that affect Afro-descendant people and Afro-descendant women in particular, because of the disparities between Afro-descendant people in Colombia and non-Afro-descendant people. There are definitely race-based. Right now, violence is concentrated, focused on Afro-descendant territories and communities, and Afro-descendant communities are disproportionately affected by the internal conflict, by the economic policies that the government is imposing on the communities and the territories. There are no policies that address specifically the issue of Afro-descendant people as such. So we are all put on the same bus. So all those are issues. There's definitely a relation between the violence and between the discrimination and between the different factors that affect Afro-descendant people and race. Yeah, there is racism, and there are caused by the racism that affects the country, that is in the country.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions that they would like to ask or comments?
It seems like we have maybe momentarily lost Natalia, but Charo, do you want to go ahead and answer that last question?
Yes. I didn't hear a question. Let me see. It's on the chat. Changes to mining code by the state, is this being considered in similar way to how the edition of the was company? The mining code is in process. What we are doing is right now fighting the right to be consulted. Afro-descendant communities have, by the ILO 169 convention, the right to prior consultation and consent, and informed consent. And we are right now in the process of fighting for to be consulted in this process for the changes on the mining code. However, we are facing differences between the government during the period of the eviction and the government during this period now. The government during the eviction was absolutely right-wing government, outspoken, that everybody saw and knew what was saying. This government doesn't do the same, also is right-wing too. They speak a rhetoric language, they are rhetoric, they look friendly, but they do things underneath that we have to make the effort to expose. So people don't believe that now we are in a better situation than we were before, because this particular president is not directly pointing and outspoken about against human rights defenders. Right now it is an internal fight with the government to create spaces for prior consultation of the mining code. However, the government really wants to do this in the same way that happens with the mining concessions. Just do it without the consultation, just do it closed doors. And we are organizing to fight that. We are trying to get in the table and demanding to be at the table with the government to review this mining code and make sure that the rights of artisanal miners are not going to be affected, as we know are going to be by these changes. There is also something about the U.S. Department of State. If you could comment on the effect on the U.S. Department involvement in the decision of the local government. Well, you're welcome. This question that is raising Amy, it impacts when the eviction of the community was going to happen. What we did was mobilize great solidarity from the United States and other parts, also Europe and Canada. But United States was very strong because we have the liability with the government. And I can mention, for instance, we asked people to send faxes to the Department of State to the point that their fax machine was broken of the many faxes they received from people from here all over the country, asking them to stop, to demand from the government to stop the eviction. So it was an impact. It was an impact when the mayor of the community, the mayor of the municipality will receive international calls from the Department of State saying that they were receiving all these demands, all these demands from the U.S. constituency asking to stop the eviction, and that did impact. What haven't made great impact, unfortunately, is on the Colombian government to follow up with the legal obligations they have. The Constitutional Court have ordered to stop the concessions, have ordered to protect the communities, to recognize the rights of the community councils to the lands, and the government have done anything, particularly in terms of the protection and the preventing these illegal miners, foreign miners, to come into the community. So the communities and the leaders have been exposed again and again to the threats that impose the presence of these miners in the region. Just recently we heard that the person that was causing the eviction is looking again for legal actions against the community. So we are just following up on that. The legal actions haven't happened yet, but he's trying again. So we probably will need to mobilize again that. But it's definitely some kind of impact in the localities when there is.
I think we've lost Charo, so and sorry that is so abrupt. We're hoping to get her back. In the meantime, I think, Carla, do you want to move to talking about how people can access the kits and apply for their own copy of the movies? Hello? Carla, are you with us?
Hello.
Oh, hello, I'm here. Sorry about that. And if we get Charo back, and she is able to complete her answer to the question, she's more than welcome to interrupt me at any point, of course.
I think she might be back. Charo, are you back?
Yes, I'm back.
Oh, good.
Charo, do you want to just finish up and round off the questions so that Carla can talk about how to get the screening kits? We're getting down to 15 minutes left in the webinar.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Well, thank you everybody for the questions. It really helps to clarify and update better. I just want to say that it is really important for Afro-Colombian women human rights defenders that others are informed and aware of what is happening against women in Colombia, Afro-descendant women in Colombia. And it will be really helpful for us that what you hear is communicated to others. We are constantly producing alerts and communications about human rights abuses against Afro-descendant women and Afro-descendant human rights defenders. And any action that you take is important to us. Any information, any communication that you take is important for us. I'm going to write in the chat the website that we have now, and I am assuming that emails are going to be exchanged. So the free to take like email and write me if you have any other questions. And if you want to be, if you want me to add you to our mail list, I would be happy to do so to keep everyone informed. And thank you very much again for this space.
Thank you, Charo. We appreciate all of your contributions in your work for human rights in Colombia. Carla, do you want to speak about the screening kits and how to apply for them?
Sure. Thank you again, Charo, for all that you do and for taking the time to answer all of our questions. So just to give you I know most of you were here when Angie gave a pretty in-depth discussion about the origins of the Women, War, and Peace series and the 5 different films in the series, and what sort of inspired us to create the screening kits. And so on that note, now hopefully that most of you have seen one of the films, The War We Are Living, online, and we've had a chance to discuss it here. We hope you'll be interested in seeing the rest of the films in the series, and to that end, that's why we've created the DVD set of the films, and we hope you'll watch them, and also that you'll share them with members of your organizations, people in your community for training, education, awareness raising, and fodder for discussion. So what are the screening kits? As we sort of already touched upon, the screening kits are essentially a nice DVD box set, and they include region-free DVDs, meaning they can be played anywhere in the world, with the 5 films in the series, and a CD with a special discussion guide that can be downloaded to computer, and it's a printer-friendly format. And the discussion guide has introductions to each of the films, discussion questions, additional resources, and a special interview with the activists from each of the countries. So there are 5 special interviews. Each screening kit has language options for English, Spanish, French, and Arabic. The films have all been dubbed into those 4 languages, so you can choose your language from each and every kit, and the discussion guide is also available in those 4 languages. So that's what the screening kits are. How to get the screening kits is hopefully pretty easy. We're very excited to be able to offer the screening kits for free. That includes, the DVDs and the public performance rights to show the films in a public setting. That's available for free, although we do have to ask that folks who receive the kits pay for shipping just due to limited budget on our end. To request a kit, just go to our website, which is peaceisloud.org. There you'll find more information on the screening kits, a map of where they are, links to who are, the partners who already have the kits, and just more details about the films and how to use the films in your community.
I think we've lost Angie. Can people please speak their talk, Carla? Can people please, oh, you're here, you're back. Okay, just one second, Carla. Can people please keep their talk buttons off? If you're not speaking, it can interrupt the speaker and cut them off. So please try and keep your talk buttons off.
Thank you, Natalia. I'm so sorry I cut out. I'm not exactly sure where I cut out, but hopefully
about accessing. I think you were speaking about accessing the kits and on the website.
Great.
I think that's for you.
Great. So folks, as I was saying, hopefully you heard that you can go to the website to learn more, and there's a link to complete an application to request kits. It's pretty brief. It's just asking for your contact information and a brief sketch of how you'd use the films. And if you submit it, we will follow up directly by email, and we can answer any questions you might have. If you have any questions before you want to submit the application, you can just shoot us a note. I'm at Carla, that's Carla with a C, at peaceisloud.org. I know we're running out of time, but if anyone has any quick questions about the screening kits or how to request them, feel free to let me know, or we can follow up after the webinar as well.
Carla, there's a question in the chat box about if an organization can't cover shipping. Do you want to answer that?
Certainly. I mean, the most important thing is to get these screening kits out to all of you to help you do the great work that you are doing. So if shipping costs would be prohibitive, we are happy to work with you to make sure that you can get the screening kit. And that's something we can just follow up with after you complete an application form.
Great. Are there any other questions? Okay. So with that, then I'm going to pass it on to Leila. Everybody has Carla's email in case you think of something you want to ask later on. Leila, I think that you are on right now for quality.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Natalia. Hello again, everyone. Thank you so much again for joining us, and we hope that you've enjoyed the session and that it was useful to you and your work. And a big thank you also to Charo, as well as Carla, Angie, Natalia, and Rachel. Something important, we would appreciate if you could fill out the evaluation form, which we'll send to you after the session. This would really help us also to maybe improve the next sessions we have and to hear your opinion and the feedback that you may have about the session. And also, if everyone agrees to share the contact information, we'll send the participant list to you. So if you don't want to share your contact information, please let us know by writing to membership@awid.org. And also, we hope that you will keep in touch with us as well, and Peace is Loud. And if you have any comments or questions, any delayed thoughts and feedback, please feel free to send those to us at membership@awid.org. And again, thank you everyone for participating, and depending